Hello, everybody. Welcome to Holochain Horizon. I'm a little nervous. This is the first time the Holochain Foundation is doing one of these live streams, and that's also really exciting. Today, I'm here, Eric Harris-Braun, Executive Director of the Holochain Foundation, with Madelynn Martiniere, Director of Ecosystem. And I'm super excited that I get to introduce her to the community, and actually people get to really start to get to know what she's been doing and what she's part of in this work. But first, I want to say a few words about why we're doing this today, like what's happening here. And um, that is about the evolution of the Holochain Foundation. As many of you know from the posts that we put in the past, the foundation has historically been just an intellectual property holder, a stewardship entity for Holochain, the technology, and also for the owned for-profit entities that allow us to build out open source tech in a way that's actually viable in the world, which is a hard problem. And so it has not been really an operational entity. And now that it is, it's time for us to actually have more visibility and step in as a foundation. And so this is just one of the steps in doing that, becoming more visible, having more talking points, and share what we've been doing over this time. So that's why we're here, why we're doing it right now. And especially because we're really interested in getting to more participatory practices and being more transparent. So we'll get to talk a little bit more about that. But now I get to introduce Madelynn. I'm just super thrilled, Madelynn, to have you on board with us. It's it's been such a treat to be working with you over the last months now that we've been spinning up the Holochain Foundation. Madelynn comes to us with a lifetime, literally a lifetime of experience working with open source technology, hardware and software, starting hacker spaces, working with organizations that are spinning up open source software. You just have such a commitment also to participatory process and landing that in mature, steady ways. And so I've just been having such a ball working with you in creating like what is the big structure that we can hold a foundation for that mimics the kind of depth of quality and pattern as the IETF has for holding global infrastructure for that's open source. So that's my thank you for being with us. And if there's anything you want to say and share about your history or about why this is a thing that you chose to be a part of and give us your talents, I'd love to hear it.
No, thanks so much for the really kind introduction, Eric. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you and the team. Really been more deeply engaged over the past year, but I've been a fan of all that Holochain has been doing and the vision for the world since the beginning. And I feel really grateful to be part of this next chapter for as the organization grows and develops and as the technology grows and develops. And I think you absolutely hit it right off the bat, which is what a lot of the work that we've been playing with that we'll talk about throughout this conversation is how do we really build the foundation as not just the steward of the technology, but the steward of the ecosystem. And so how do we create processes and pathways for the community to be in deeper dialogue with us about what it is that they're building? How can we best support that? How do we engage them in actually in the development? And as we'll talk about how we've been thinking about that, how that process evolves over time. Anyone here who knows like these type of evolutions take time and consideration to do well. But we're starting it now. So I'm so deeply grateful to be here and to meet so much of the community.
Thanks. Yeah, and just to be clear, Madelynn not only is the director of ecosystem, but she's also on the foundation council. So as a steward of the organization at really the strategic level and helping us really think through this stuff and has the experience from all of the previous places you've shared your talents into to be able to do that. So I'm excited about
Quickly
those two levels.
for folks here, because I just for clarity, because this was a learning for me too. So counselor in our context is equivalent to a board. So the counselor in where we're established, that is that work. And I'll hint to the fact that in part of our processes and evolutions is thinking about how do we expand more of that advisory capacity, and bringing more leadership into that. So I just want to highlight that because that was even when we first started talking, I was like, well, what is the difference between that and a board
Yep.
member? And not sure where folks are coming from the world, but helpful piece of context.
Right. And again, that's what this event is all about, is starting to share all of the work that we've been doing in doing like what you call it, creating the foundations of the foundation. So I guess the next thing that we wanted to talk a little bit about is the question of where have we been? Where have we been? So that we can get to where are we now, so that we can get to where are we going. That's the arc of our conversation today after this little bit of introduction. So where have we been for the last almost a year now? Not quite. We've been really working on spinning up the Holochain Foundation as an operational entity, as we've been saying. So one question is, why now? Why not before? Well, it's always been in the plan that the Holochain Foundation would be an operational foundation running and working. And I remember so many of our executive committee meetings where I'm saying, is now the time to actually do that? And the question is, the answer is no, it's really too difficult to have two different parallel sets of operational functions going, and it's also expensive. And so we had it as one under Holo. But then, as you all know, we did this split of the organizations a little while ago. And so it's because the time was right. It was for a bunch of different reasons. And where we are is in this place of being able to create more focus for the different parts of the organizations, or the different part of the organization that was running. But there was also something critical that happened in all of this, which, as folks should know if you've been following us carefully, the whole structure of what we did and how we set ourselves up is to be able to solve this really difficult problem of funding open source infrastructure that has to be held in the commons, that has to be held collectively by everybody. And so that is why the foundation was the steward of a for-profit organization, so that the for-profit organization could have a business model that could build out and pay for this collective holding, but it had to be owned by a stewardship organization. Our process there was, of course, to have a function hosting that had a value system attached to it, HoloFuel, which was our currency system, our mutual credit currency that would be built on top of Holochain. And part of what happened, as always happens in for-profit businesses, is the landscape changed over that time and new things became possible. And so one of the key things that is where we are now is that comes out of, and where we have been, comes out of the realization that that thing that we wanted to create, a mutual credit currency to be able to measure the accounting value of hosting of this, what we call a productive capacity measured by a mutual credit currency, that function was being asked for by many more people who were producing digital distributed infrastructure. And they were saying, hey, we've got energy systems, we've got video hosting, we've got Wi-Fi hosting. Could we use the mutual credit system that you've devised for tracking hosting value, this productive capacity of hosting, could we use that for this other purpose? And so that was a bigger scope than what was in Holo's remit. And so it became critical for us we decided strategically to create another organization unit to do that. And so that meant, as part of the right time for the Holochain Foundation to become its own operational entity and own both Holo and Unit, the software company that's creating that capacity for an accounting system for managing distributed digital productive capacities and doing accounting with that and creating alliances so that that value had much larger liquidity pools. So that's a big part of why we are where we are, to be able to manage and hold that, to deliver on the bigger promise of having this kind of an accounting system for productive capacities.
Can I add something to that, Eric?
Please do.
I think is really, I think that this moment and this transition really marks this next level of growth and maturity for the organization and for the ecosystem. And this is a very common practice in open source projects. I think even, the why things are set up that way right off the bat, but also in being able to create these additional entities, right? They're still supported by and stewarded by the core foundation. It allows for greater focus, really, on the pieces that each group is most passionate about and most specialized in. And it still maintains the grounding in the ecosystem and the ecosystem commitments and the community commitments by the relationship of the foundation. So there's a really, I think we've learned a lot over the years. I'm really excited to see this new step because we're starting to see a pattern that is already mirrored in a lot of these spaces, and we're learning how that works for us. And so really being able to deliver on each of the pieces of what people are excited about what Holochain can do, and allowing them to really go find their people, and find those projects that most matter to them, and then be able to be in a position as the foundation to really support that. So that to me is really exciting for where we are, and it's a new step and a new chapter.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So where are we now? I think there's a lot of things we can say about what we've been doing over the last 6 to 8 months. I'm really excited about how much time and care we put into building the technical team and really landing leadership inside that team. Hats off to Gregory and Yost and all the team that have really stepped up to being able to move solidly and carefully for a working and reliable holochain. Our release structure is coming out more readily. The quality of what we're releasing is much higher. I'm very excited about that. I'm excited about our ability to be more transparent. We have an operational roadmap, and so we can show people where we are, even when that changes, like what people get to see on our website of what we think is going to come out in the future and when is what we know now. And when it changes and we go forward. And so I'm excited about that. And it's also pretty, I don't know, it just feels really good to have been able to get to that place and have that be held by the foundation operationally. Um, there's the other side of it, which maybe Madelynn, since you've been so instrumental in helping me hold this work, in fact, actually driving it and telling me what to do about this kind of stuff, about how we hold the ecosystem and how we do the strategic development of a foundation and be able to hold these different layers, because I've been so much more over on the technical side. Maybe you can speak to a little bit of what we've done, what the process has been to get there, and how that is where we're at, like where we're at right now as a result, and then we can move into where we're going to go with that.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna answer your question, but I'm up a little bit because there's also a question that is apropos to this, which is asking about what elements, functions, and services are encompassed by the term ecosystem. So I want to up level a little bit to help folks think about how we're thinking about the work streams inside of the foundation, and as we're talking about these leadership teams that are growing in capacity in that structure. So we're looking at our work streams inside the foundation right now are focused on three things, right? We're looking at operations, we're looking at technical, and we're looking at ecosystem. And from a definitions perspective, right, our operations work is the less fun stuff, but as Eric was saying, it's the laying the foundations of the foundation. But that is really all of that activity is kind of at the nexus of kind of the social, human resources, financial, and governance structures and protocols that really support the thriving of the whole organization. Um, our technical work, right, is what is most familiar to folks. Like that is really focused on the functionality, the stability, and the ongoing evolution of the code base, as well as ongoing work around technical standards for applications and use cases. And so that's when Eric's talking about the roadmap, and I'm hoping that Nathan, who's helping support and orchestrating this live stream today, can drop the link in the chat to our technical roadmap. Right, we now actually have made visible to the community a live and evolving roadmaps. We can see actually not just what is happening, but you can actually see how the work is happening and how things are getting scoped and planned and follow along, to as granular as a level as you want. And then to answer the ecosystem question, this is really focused on how are we fostering greater community learning, participation, and really kind of mechanisms for greater responsiveness and communications with the community around what it is that they're needing and looking to build. So those are the three levels of kind of what we're focused on, there's obviously a lot of interconnection into those things, right? So every time we're talking about communications, and we're looking at our dev pulses as an example and dev office hours, these are some of the activities that folks are familiar with that are hitting across of those things. I can talk a little bit about, in more granular detail around what it is that we're looking for, the types of ecosystem activities, the types of partnerships we're looking for, but I might plant that one for a little bit later in the discussion around that kind of where are we going and what is it we're looking for and how can the community really come and work with us on this.
Yeah. I think it's great as a transition, right? Because where are we now in the ecosystem? Where we are now is continuing to service the partners that we have on like a one-on-one basis, and being able to hold the work that they've been doing, like Vola Systems and like Certia and like Visver and like Ion. So these are projects that we have right now that are part of the ecosystem that have been around for a long time that we need to hold. And then we also need to come up with a formalized patterns and processes for adding in new partners into the ecosystem and be able to hold that less on a one-off basis and more on, hey, this is a foundation with programs that allow us to be able to have membranes and surface for attachment, using the kinds of words I like for these kinds of groups to come in. And so it's doing that work. That's what's coming. So that's where we are now. Is there any other pieces that we wanted to talk about where we are now before we move into the where we're going, Madelynn? Is there other pieces that you wanted to share about?
No, but I will ask. You used kind of two terms there, and you froze a little bit for me there. So I maybe jumping again. But you're talking about the membranes, and so I'm actually curious in this context, right? When you're talking about creating these membranes, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I want to back up quite a ways, and then I'll be able to get to that, and I think hopefully make that really clear. So the thing that makes Holochain different and really powerful is this notion of being able to create a engagement space, a social engagement space that is held by the people who are those participating in that engagement space. That's an abstract term, right? An engagement space is really all of the things that people do together when they share some kind of social contract, some kind of rules of the game, some kind of way of participating together. And bringing that into the world as a public good, as a public capacity, is what we want to do. But that right there implies that that engagement space will have some kind of boundary. It's the people who are playing that game together, right? And so that boundary has to have some kind of surface area, some kind of entry points for other such boundaries to participate, for people to come in and out of that kind of boundary, for information to come in and out of that boundary. And that's what I mean by a membrane, right? And so this happens at the technical level. That's what Holochain can do at a technical level. And also we need to mirror that kind of capacity in the foundation. And it's just really normal, right? This is the way human social units operate. There's a membrane, like what is it to take part in this? And so for us, as an example, now that I did my abstraction going into the example, for us, it's like, okay, we're going to have a technical group whose responsibility is to come up with the standards for how you do, I don't know, some kind of usage of Holochain, some protocol built on top of Holochain for whatever it might be, mutual credit currencies, or for how you do interactions on mobile, or for how you create data standards for apps to use. And that group, for whatever specific area it is going to need to have a membrane, who's in and who's out, who makes decisions, handle power dynamics, and so on. So that's what I mean. And this is the kind of thing that we want to be mirroring in the foundation as is built into the capacity upgrade that Holochain is. Like, we're trying to do both of those at the same time. And that was hard to do at the beginning when we're just barely getting the coherence of Holochain itself in and having a startup organization and so on. And this is part of why pulling apart the organization now gives us time as the foundation to focus on that and hold that kind of energy. Back to your focus piece there. So I added a lot of things in there because I thought that would help actually make it seem what this surface area for attachment to a membrane might look like. It might be, right? In my way of, like, I get really excited about that stuff because that's, if you have a framework for doing that, well, it gets really exciting. So that's what we're just trying to do here. And I love how you can help bring that in at this higher level, the social level in the ecosystem. So that gets back to answering that question about what are those services? Membranes,
Yeah.
attachment points on those.
Oh,
That's what they are.
I thank you so much for naming that in this space. But I think it's one of the things that I've certainly been having fun on, and clearly you have as well, is exactly that. Like, how are we creating a structure for the foundation that mirrors the values and the vision of Holochain, right? And how are we both learning from really good patterns of how open source software projects get developed, and also expand our capacity and the broader ecosystem capacity to what's possible, right? And so this thinking about how do we create these membranes, is part of that is the definition work. And I think that was a lot of the very early work, was to understanding the definition work of those membranes. And then the next piece is, and where are we creating those pathways and that flow and that movement in and out. And I think that's one of the places where, and we've talked about this, you see so many times in open source projects, where there's a lot of labor of love that comes into these, that it's not clear of how folks can actually engage, or when they can also step away and still have their contributions being really effectively honored. And there's so much encompassed in this work, right? There is the engagement in the technology, and the building of Holochain itself, but there's also so much of what we've been talking about, is this: how are we shifting some of these conversations in the space to help think about what's possible, and what's possible in kind of organizational transformation and cultural transformation, what's necessary to really help make the change that we want to see. So I love talking about this stuff. I think it's helpful for other folks to hear, because this is actually, we are trying to do things differently here, while still really honoring and learning patterns that work, but also stretching ourselves a little bit here and saying, well, what is possible within the bounds of existing structures that we can do, to really create a living system and a living ecosystem within and around Holochain.
Yeah. So I don't know, like maybe we can go a little bit into where we're going around this and some of the plans that we have. Like, I'm relying on your skill and experience, and have been really enjoying having the watching the offerings that you're putting together about what we need to build, how we can do it, and how we can get there from almost zero, right? Because we've had what we had before, and now we have to have a bigger capacity inside the foundation. I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about what you have envisioned for us to do to be able to create all those kinds of engagement spaces at this foundation level.
Sure, I can share a little bit about what we're thinking about. Um, one of the things that is near and dear to my heart and my work is really around grounding this work in real life application. And so, from working with refugees and working with farming communities and fishers, and really understanding how is the work that we're doing hyper relevant to transforming some of these very critical industries. And we've been building and growing steadily and surely. And one of the things that I've experienced in other spaces, and bringing this in here, is exactly that, some of that culture change, and helping understand both the scope of the problem space and the scope of what's possible, and bringing folks along for that journey. So a lot of the kind of early work that we're starting to do is in building partnership and relationship, and as Eric mentioned, starting to build some of these containers where we can not only have these types of conversations with folks who are actively building things on the ground for community, but also to then start to build prototypes around that. So we can not only talk about it, and there's a lot of great communities of practice that are really good at holding that space for what's possible, but then how do we ground it in something that people can touch and feel? And so we're looking at, over the span of the next year, of not only creating some, when we talk about communities of practice, where folks can come and share knowledge across and what their own projects and what are they learning and what are some of the frustrations, the challenges, the pain points, the opportunities that they see to start to create some cross-pollination there, but also start to create more structured containers where folks can come together across a particular discipline or challenge and really, really drop in deep and understand where the points of intervention, or as Eric likes to hear me say, the acupuncture points are that they can, and then can we build something together that actually shows what's possible. And so if this in our mind really helps uh, tell the story and ground it in something that's practical. And do this with the stakeholders that across these places that don't normally get a seat at the table for these kind of conversations. So I'm really excited about that. And we've been in some really fantastic conversations there. And then I think, as Eric alluded to as well, is also how do we take some of these fantastic relationships that we've had in the ecosystem with projects that have really been in the forefront of building on Holochain and start to create structured partnership around them and to create more partnerships in this space that are able to we can help and socialize the work that they're doing, help connect them into the ecosystem and to other parties, and be able to support them more as the foundation over time. So I think there's a couple different levels that we want to play with, and membranes I think is a perfect example naming of that, where depending on the depth of relationship that we have with them, that it's going to look slightly different. So that's the work right now is really in creating those spaces. The last thing that I'll say there is kind of going up a level. And one of the things that is encompassed under this is how do we best support our developers? And so that is a place, and we've been doing our developer office hours. We have the dev pulses that come out that keep people apprised of what's happening out, but those dev office hours are really a great place for folks to come and troubleshoot and also to be in community and communications with the technical team. But also starting to explore what are the possibilities to how can we really help our developer community be successful in building on Holochain, and to have fun and to play with it, right? It's new and it's exciting, and it can be challenging sometimes because it's new. And so where are those places that we can really create better experience for them in really coming in and feeling like they're part of the community and that they feel supported in their own journey as they're learning to build on Holochain. So that's the other piece that I wanted to touch on, was how do we specifically support the developers that are playing with us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a thing that we've been knowing is crucial for the whole time that we've been doing this, and it's a never-ending challenge. So we have our scaffolding tools that allows you with just a few commands to spin up a whole application, but it's still harder than one would like to be able to do that and dive in easily. And we do have pretty decent documentation. Like, we've been really putting efforts into upgrading the documentation, but this is a never-ending challenge of how do you actually make the mind shift of building in a decentralized system. What is the way you have to think about it differently, even if, which is the case, even if 90% of the code that any app developer on Holochain is writing is UI app that looks almost exactly the same as if you were building a standard web app, that portion that isn't that requires some mind shift, and we have some ways to go in really supporting that. And that's a piece that we really want to work on.
I'm going to answer a quick question that actually came in that is relevant for this before we move
Yeah.
on, which is clarifying around kind of some of our partnerships in existence and what's being sought. Eric, you started to talk about some of the partnerships we already have. You want to expand on that, and I'll talk about a little bit more of what we're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. So we have a partnership with Vola Systems. We have helped them build a chat app that lives on their phones that is completely decentralized. And we've been helping them also design a backup app. And they are doing some really interesting things that we're very excited about coming down the line, and are using Holochain as their underlying capacity again to create engagement spaces. So that's one that has been valuable, very valuable to us, and we really appreciate working with them. And so we've done significant investment of developer time and energy in to make that happen. So that's one like really deep um, uh, engagement with a partner, which has a lot of back and forth. We have some that are more in the distance that are where we support and say, hey, this is a great thing that you're doing. We have a simple MOU with them, like for example, Hive, but they've been operating always on nodes on Holo, and they're piece of the ecosystem, and they've been around from the beginning. They were one of the first organizations to really take on building significant code on top of Holochain and try to bring it to market. We have engagement with Atom, as it's called, or Perspectivism. There's a couple different names with it that have built some very interesting technology on top of Holochain that does a chat-based system that can actually do local AI. And so they show up in our dev.hc, and they're, one of the developers, or the core developer was one of the early developers of Holochain. So that's really exciting to us. There's a company that's building out Certia, that's building out health tracking wallets and wants to have an engagement space around health data, which is a really cool thing to have, of sharing and having local private groups for sharing your health data, rather than having it go to some centralized database where you don't know what's happening and how that's being monetized on you. So these are active projects that we have relationship with, that we answer technical questions for. And the thing about, or like one of the key things that's being sought, or has been in that level, is people who are building for delivery to the world. And so we can put a lot of energy into that. We also need to put energy into the partnerships where people are experimenting. We need both sides, but those are some of the ones that are in place. I think one other one that I want to bring to people's attention is it's interesting. This kind of partnership is a ecosystemic tooling partnership. So people may not be aware of the Holo REA, or the value flows, or the REA accounting system, which is a interesting enterprise level or enterprise ecosystem step up of double entry bookkeeping. That was a standard that was created quite a while ago and is an ISO standard. There is a Holochain implementation of that, and some stewards of this, the valueflows.io, I think if you want to go look at it, that have been building an ontology of how you do this kind of value flow accounting cross ecosystem. You need tools like Holochain that make that transparent, all those kinds of value flows transparent, so the partners in the ecosystem can see it and can act on that. And so we have partnership with them, and have supported hrea.io. If you go there, you can see that, and you can see actually some of the actual funding that has gone to out of the, not of the foundation, because it wasn't actually doing that at the time, but we've been supporting that in the ecosystem. And we want to continue to support that at the tooling level, but also players who are building on top of that. So that's building on top of something that's built on top of Holochain, because we know that that kind of capacity building is really valuable in the space. And so for that, we've been in partnership with the Carbon Farm Network, and building an application that builds on top of Holo REA to actually deliver on the value flow accounting in a specific area, Columbia County, New York. This is out of the textile lab, and they're actually tracking fibers that go from farms into carding, into spinning, all the way up to the looms that go then to the sweater and the designer maker. So this is a really interesting cross ecosystem way of using Holochain. So those are some of the examples of the ones that are in play. There are other ones at different levels of maturity and engagement that we have, but I think that should give you a flavor.
I think I'll also call in some things that I'd love to see. I think one of the things that we're starting to see in this space is where can we create kind of multi-party partnerships, right? Rather than the
Yes.
one-to-one more, which oftentimes can look and feel more transactional. So how can we actually support in creating partnership with the foundation and multiple entities to work together on something? That's something I'm personally really excited about, because very much in line with how we work. As Eric said, anything that is really touching people doing the work, like it's touching the ground. And so that doesn't necessarily have to be a mature product, but that has to be those that are actually building with community, so that we're learning together through that process of actually building something that folks can really touch and feel. So that's things like supply chain is really interesting to us. Things in agriculture, in disaster response, and things where we can see the impact of the work together, and we can learn a lot in doing that. So those are places that are really interesting. And then more folks playing with Holochain. So, a huge gratitude and hat tip for the work that Dark Soil has been doing in developer education, among many other things. And I think more partnerships like that, where we can actually get Holochain more into the public consciousness and the developer consciousness around what's possible. And we absolutely could use more partnership and support in doing that. So I'm gonna put that one out there into the live stream and
Yeah.
see if it comes back as well.
That's awesome, Madeline. I'm really glad that you brought that in because what Dark Soil has done is it's a little bit like HREA, but it's a general thing. They are a dev shop that have been creating amazing tools. They've actually put pull requests back into Holochain. They evaluate capacity where capacity isn't working. They find bugs. They come up with different solutions. And so that kind of partnership, more dev shops in the world, we're looking for that. That's a really important piece of what we want.
100%.
Would you also be willing to talk about a different kind of partnership that you've been really honing in on, and I think we're actually beginning to live into, which is the partnership with other distributed and decentralized tech projects? So not just the partnerships of people who use Holochain, but how do we ourselves situate ourselves and be responsible to be in the ecosystem of other players who are solving the same kind of problems, because we don't believe that we're the only solution
Yeah,
to these problems. And so we really are stepping that up. And I think you've got some ideas about how we can do that.
I do. I have some thoughts on that. Um, no, one of the things that brought me to Holochain, the things that I'm really fascinated in is how are we creating the broader capacity, not just within an organization, but the broader capacity of those that are building commons infrastructure, commons enabling infrastructure. Like how do we create the spaces to have those conversations and to unlock some of that resourcing, right? We started this call talking a little bit about how the structure of Holochain and the organizations in the mix, how that's evolved over time. And the reason that we keep bringing that up in these spaces is because we're not alone in having to go through that path. And part of that is because the conversation around what is necessary and the importance of resourcing these type of core critical digital infrastructure projects, in my opinion, is sorely lacking. And I think that is starting to shift. I think the way that things are going in the world, that there is more of this recognition that we need to be having those conversations. We need to be coordinating our efforts across organizations, and building new pathways for resourcing these types of projects, so that it
Yeah.
actually gets out into the world. And so we've been really excited to have those conversations. Really, I feel like the speed at which those conversations have been happening and a lot more of the, okay, let's do it together kind of energy has really shifted in the last year. But we really want to step more into partnership and thought partnership with folks who are experiencing that, who are also speaking on this, who are advocating for this and exploring what kind of meta structures could be created to ensure that we all have the capacity to do this critical work together. So clearly that's something I'm very passionate about, bringing that into this space, because I think Holochain is emblematic of both some of what the ecosystem is experiencing, and we can also serve as an example of how to do things differently. But we have to do that in partnership as in larger
Yeah.
conversation.
I mean, this piece is something you and I have talked a lot about, and it's just worth being in the conversation and kind of making transparent this conversation that we've been in, the challenge of that, right? It is very reasonable for people to criticize Holochain for having gone, the Holochain Foundation and our work having gone alone for a long time and not done enough working with other projects who are doing something similar. But we've talked about the problem of coherence, that it's really hard to work with other people who are even doing something that seems like it's the same thing when you're operating under slightly different coherences. And so I think this is also one of the spaces where we want to say, okay, it's fine. We worked this time. We built something that is actually reaching maturity now. We needed to be within our blinders because we knew the coherence that we were operating under. But now we have to actually find how to share the coherences that other people were operating under. And I think you're exactly right. That is shifting. We're not the only ones who have been doing that and recognizing that it's time to play together because enough of our own internal coherence was built that we can hold it now and share with others. And so as examples, like this isn't just we want to do this, it's we are doing this. Last year at DWeb, I went to DWeb and ended up sitting at the table with people in ways that I had not been able to sit at the table with other projects in years before because of my own inability to like not be to be outside my own coherence, right? And so those things have borne fruit. Those meetings from last year during DWeb have borne fruit to new meetings with DWeb where all the groups are, where a number of these groups are coming together, not so much as the groups coming together, but the individuals with a vision for how the decentralized web can move forward in the world and building that together. And that's happening this summer. And I'm really excited about that. And there are more things like that that are in the pipeline where we can do that kind of building.
Exciting times ahead.
Yeah. So what do we want to talk about next, Madelynn? What questions, where should we go now?
I think I think this concludes our talking portion. We got through and I hope this was supportive for folks, get a little bit of context and kind of where we've been and where we're at now and where we're going. And our intention is to host more of these conversations. So as things come into greater fidelity, greater coherence, as Eric says, that we can really call folks in very tangible ways into these pieces. But I'm really, if folks are interested in more partnerships, they want to dive in deeper, I'm more than happy to reach out and to chat and connect. And then we wanted to leave a little bit of space here for some additional questions. I think we've been grabbing them as we've been going, where they have fit. But I know we've got a few other ones here. Eric, there's a question here around holochain stability.
Yeah,
You want to talk a little bit about how we're thinking about that and talk about
sure.
wind tunnel and what that looks like?
Yeah. So the question, this is Victory Lane. Thank you for the question. It's a very valid question. Is Holochain stable right now? That is a funny question because stability always depends on the consumer. So the question is stable for what purpose? So Holochain 0.5.4, which is the current release that's out, is it stable? I am using it on a daily basis in Moss, and I hold video calls with that, and we write in notebooks and we have a chat app, a couple chat apps that we use, and I use it on a daily basis. Is it stable? Could you have that as a product out in the world? No, probably not, because it's going to have some bugs and things are not going to synchronize at the rate that they should. And so for us, one level, it's stable. For another level, it's not stable. Another way to answer that question is the API stable? And the answer there is no. 0.5 API is not stable. When 0 comes out, 0.6 comes out, there will be changes. And as a developer who's developing, if you can't be able to do the upgrades to the next API and that's outside of your level of comfort or organizational need. It's not just about capacity or comfort. It's what your organizational need is. No, it's not stable. There will be breaking changes until we get to 1.0. In any case, we support the different ones, the different releases for a period of time. So you can count on it and can have an upgrade path for your use cases. Another way of looking at it is it stable for me to begin building on because I know that in 6 months I'm going to want to be able to release, or in a year I'm going to want to be able to release, I'm building something big. Absolutely. It's stable enough to be able to do that kind of building and knowing transparently that you're going to have do some upgrades and some work on your different DNAs and maybe even on your UI connecting to those DNAs. So it's variable, and I'm just trying to be as straight as I can about that. When we have 1.0, then we'll have a long-term stable API. And not only that, we will have gone through all the battery of tests that actually we are building into Wind Tunnel, which is strongly in progress right now. That's a thing that we part of. Oh, that we didn't even talk about this at the beginning of building the foundations for the foundation is hiring new people on. And so we've got 2 new engineers in who are focusing on Wind Tunnel and being able to deliver on having a really strong network of testing and testing and testing what the performance the performance envelope of Holochain is, and the long-term stability of having data on the DHTs over a long period of time, how things grow, and so on. So all that is in progress. And your answer is stable for what? Depends on who you are.
Yeah. I really appreciate and just want to double click on the wind tunnel approach because I think that's even in the framing of that it's been helpful for me to understand and to give folks the tools to make their own decisions around what level of stability is necessary for where you are in your project. And this is as we're building something experimental and as we're evolving it, right? For some of the bigger, bigger production level projects, it may not be quite as stable as you want. And that's okay. But we want to do with this testing infrastructure is to make it more visible to folks around what the constraints are and what to expect. And in there is as they're building on Holochain, so that you as the project builders can make determinations around what point you want to start playing and exploring with it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I realize we're using this term wind tunnel, and I actually don't think we define the word wind tunnel. So we want to
Yeah.
define that.
We've talked about it a lot in public, and so sometimes we can assume that everybody who's listening knows what it is. But just to recap on that, so the idea behind wind tunnel was to be able to say, oh, we need a tool like a wind tunnel is for airplanes that can measure the performance envelope of a particular design. And performance envelope, what I mean is, as an airplane, how much weight can you put on it before it stalls? How fast can it climb? What is the glide ratio so that you know how far away from an airport you can be if your engines fail, right? Different airplanes at different levels of types of airplanes and at different levels in the development of aviation had very different performance capacities. And that's why we wanted this tool, is to be able to measure what the current performance capacity of Holochain was in terms of how many different nodes can be simultaneously adding data at what rate into a DHT, and how long does it take for that data to synchronize? Is that good enough for your use case or not? It might not be. If you're trying to run a real-time game with 1,000 people, it's probably not going to work for you right now because we're still flying biplanes. Or no, now we have a nice fixed wing airframe that has a 200 horsepower engine. It's not a 1,000 horsepower engine, right? You see that that's the kind of thing we want to be able to measure. And there's so many different use cases that you have to be able to drive different scenarios. And that's what Wind Tunnel can do. It allows you to create a scenario to drive a network of Holochain nodes, see what happens, record both the rates at which data is synchronized, or any kind of thing that you want to actually measure about it, CPU usage, bandwidth usage of the different nodes, and then be able to have metrics reported. That's the tooling that we're trying to build out, and it's quite sophisticated tooling to do. It's a non-trivial task to do that for a distributed network. So it's also taken longer than we might like, but that's what we've got, and that's what Wind Tunnel does and can do.
And for also, and I mean, I keep talking about it because it's so beautiful that if for folks who want to follow along on how that's getting developed and how releases are going, and I see a question here around 1.0, our roadmap is a great place to go for that. So you can
Yeah.
see how the planning process is going for that, how that's evolving, not just on Wind Tunnel, but some of these evolving releases. So I'm going to keep plugging it because it's so good.
Yeah.
And there was a lot
Well,
of work that went into that. You did a great explainer video on the blog to think through
great.
how it was thought through and created. We've got some incredible design talent that helped make it really visually appealing.
Yeah.
I'm excited about it. I'm going to keep talking about it.
And I think let's just be straight with the question. Tony Crypto asks, how long till Holochain 1.0? Well, if you go to our roadmap, Holochain 1.0 is not on it because we can't tell how long it's going to be because we haven't actually put in all of the issues and planned them all out and estimated them out. And so it would be irresponsible of us to say it's going to be out at this particular time. Um, as soon as we know, and as soon as we have an idea of what it's going to be like, it's going to be on that roadmap. As soon as we're able to actually have the team write out the issues, actually do the estimation. But you can also see, this is what Madelynn is saying, is if you look at it, there is both the on the horizon and the planning side. And so you can see the issues that have been added in, how much of them have been planned. Then once they're moving in the in progress side, you can see how much of them have been done according to the estimation. So we're trying to be as transparent as we can and be as responsible as we can to do to that. And I'm sorry that 1.0 isn't on there, but it's just not, because we haven't been able to do all of the planning for the different pieces of that yet, but it's there.
Well, and this is just to add to that, I think this is where we talked about the intersections of the different work streams inside the foundation. And it is part of having these kind of conversations and being in more dialogue with the community around what it is that they're building is also to help inform what is most critical when. All right. So we're talking about stability, but there's also different functionalities that we have talked about in other calls and that we've explored. And so helping understand where the pulls are from the community, and so that we can be responsive to that as part of it. So
Yeah.
the other encouragement that I would say for folks on this call is to talk to us more about your projects. Come to the developer office hours, come reach out to me, help me understand what it is that you're working on. And that in turn helps us collectively to prioritize and to refine. And then
Yeah.
you'll start seeing those things are going to show up on the roadmap as we refine that. So that's my other piece to that is tell us what you're looking for, and we can bring that into the process.
Yeah, this piece that you just said there, Madelynn, I want to say to all of the people who are watching and what we're up to, this is one of the key reasons why I found it so great that you were willing to come on board with us, because you have such a commitment to participatory design at the organizational level, right? And that is participatory design, and we need to mature that. So that's part of what we want. And I know you're going to be a stand for that. So
You
I
bet.
think that that's actually probably even a pretty good place to end on, if we don't have any other questions. Um, all right. So thank you, everybody, for being part and listening to this and being part of the journey. Thank you, Madelynn, for coming on board, for actually jumping into the spotlight and sharing what you're caring about and where we are going. You're going to be way more in the spotlight now as director of ecosystem, and now that we've actually got past some of the early stages of building the foundation of the foundation. So I'm really grateful. And anything you want to add?
No, I'm so glad to be here and to get to know more and more in the community. And yes, we're looking forward to what comes next.
Thanks. So thank you all. And
All right,
see
man.
you at the next Holochain Horizon, which we should have at some point. You'll get to see us again.
Yes,
All
very
right. Take care all. Bye.